Hello, everyone. It's always fun to follow a presentation that referenced Snoop Dogg. So we're going to provide the old man response to NFTs.
By the way, Mike, I love the chairs. Can I keep him?
Yeah, you can. Actually, my feet touch the ground this year, so it's a nice...
Just about.
Thank you for joining us. My name is Mike Carlo. I am happily and proudly on the head board of directors and run a company called XanderPay, and you saw our little video earlier. I am very honored to be interviewing an old friend, Maarten Rooijers. And Maarten spent many years, as the bio indicates, with KLM and then KLM AirFrance. So we decided he counted as a local French person because you worked for the company. Can you introduce yourself a little bit about your experience, Mike?
Sure. Well, first of all, Mike, thank you for having me here, and thank you to be able to join this HETNA conference. It's really great, so appreciate that. My name, Maarten Rooijers, worked for a little over 30 years at KLM Royal Dutch Airlines in Amsterdam. Have had various commercial and financial positions. Worked for Treasury a number of years. That's where I learned what a bank account was, a credit card, and especially FX, cash management, I liked a lot. Moved over to the department where we issued a co-branded card. And lastly, but not least, I was heading a team for 15 years where we were responsible for KLM's online payment proposition in the more than 70 countries where we were flying to. We did it in close cooperation, of course, with our mother company, AirFrance, and with our partners like Delta and Kenya Airways. But all good things come to an end. So it was unfortunately COVID, which created a big reorganization in the company, and especially in the payment domain, which kind of forced me to leave the company, looking at where the payment was going, and it coincidentally came with a huge voluntary leave program of KLM. So it wasn't an easy decision, but
well, we're very fortunate to have you, and part of the discussion today, and some of the discussions we've had within the fintech track yesterday, is how does the hotel industry move forward with regard to payments? And for those of you who haven't seen it, there is a very good research study that Amadeus has just issued in the past month or so about centralized guest-centric payments and the benefits to hoteliers. And some of the conversation we had yesterday is like, well, do we need a front desk that processes payments? And in these discussions, I think we all the people yesterday agreed that payments for the hospitality industry are largely inefficient. And one of the things that KLM had done with payments is really focus the payment on the guest experience. And just for the record, we're not going to talk about B2B payments or payments from third parties today. But on the looking at the guest perspective on payments, how did you come across the whole concept of localized payments based on the guests?
Yeah, I think to a large part it had to do with our demographics. Holland, obviously a small country, 80 million people, so our home market is extremely small. We don't have any domestic flights, unlike, let's say, Air France or any American carrier. So we have always been focused. By the way, I still say we, after 30 years, it's still probably part of my DNA. But KLM has always been focused on international. I think it's also part of our Dutch culture, international trade. So my function was in digital, and within an airline industry, airlines generally make a very low profit. In a good year, an airline would have 4%. So that means there's always a focus on cost. Hence, where we were started was more initially coming from the cost side, because in the beginning, KLM only accepted credit cards for payments. Now, we all know it goes with a percentage. The average order value is something like $700. Now, if you have a card which is slightly more than 2%, you pay 15 euros in distribution cost. Now, if you compare that to a payment option, for instance, in the Netherlands, Ideal, which is very popular, which only costs you 15 or 20 cents, depending on your PSP, there you see immediately what the savings are from a distribution perspective. And take into account, again, that the margin is low, that's fantastic. So this was the primary driver for KLM to move to alternative forms of payment or more forms of payment. Soon, however, and I like that personally because I'm more coming from the sales side, we noticed that it wasn't only positive for the bottom line in respect to cost, but we also noticed an increase in conversion because not everybody has a credit card or wanted to pay by credit card. So, you know, I always say payment is very much related to the culture. Like a culture is different in any country or in any part of the world, so this is reflected how people pay. People in Japan pay way differently than they do in Brazil. If you do not tap into that local payment preference, you might lose a lot in conversion and traffic.
Well, and that's sort of, that ties into the whole head reason for being. I was almost going to try to say that in French, but I knew that would be a disaster. Sort of the role of distribution. You know, I think oftentimes we don't spend enough time talking about direct bookings as a primary element of distribution. And one of the examples that we've used for years is Chinese guests. And for those of you who've been here before, you can start reciting the story along with me. But you know, outbound Chinese guests going to a Hyatt property in Miami would not be able to pay the same way that they would be able to pay if they were going to a property in Shanghai. Because our payment structure is focused on where the property is located. The payment options are focused, not on the culture of the individual payer. And I think that's very different from the airline sector where you
Now, it's interesting that you mentioned that because in the airline industry and looking what you're saying in the hotel industry, it might be a bit of the same. At KLM, we had a so-called, let's say, closed departure box. That sounds very complex, but it's not. A closed departure box basically means that you can only book an itinerary, an origin and destination, if you are on the website of that country. So let's say you want to fly San Francisco, Amsterdam, San Francisco, you have to be on the American website. If you book that specific itinerary on the Dutch website, you will be redirected to the American website. And is that customer-centric? No, I don't think so. But why did we do it? Because it's all based on the systems and how certain airlines work in respect to yield and revenue management. It is steered by what we call origin destination, what we call a line. However, in our cooperation with AirFrance, we learned from the French, we noticed that they were doing it differently. So you could book any itinerary there, so on any website, yeah, and that's great because if I, as a Dutch person, in the old days would have booked San Fran, Paris, San Fran, I would not see the Dutch payment options or the euro. I would see the American one. So now we turn it around and we said you can book any itinerary which you want, and we take into account the website from which you book it, and then we show you the payment options of your country, and obviously we show you also the currency in your country. Of course, that's extremely customer-centric, but at the same time, those boundaries, which we kind of created ourselves, had also a positive effect because we were offering MCP DCC, and there was a higher opt-in, obviously, with the closed departure box. And also in respect to surcharges, credit card surcharges, airlines were, depending on their philosophy, but were surcharging credit cards to a certain extent where it was allowed. That could be done in some countries, but if you have an open departure box as a customer, you could circumvent that moving to another one. But still, we thought that the whole customer-centering approach was more important than those
So in the corollary for the hotel sector is, I think most hotels load their rates in the currency of the hotel property.
Yeah.
And, one of the things we were discussing yesterday was, since hotel brands don't necessarily view their apps or their websites as e-commerce platforms, you really can't convert currencies in that scenario. Is that an opportunity you see for the industry for the future?
It's a huge opportunity. I must say, with airlines, it's probably a bit easier because everything is centralized. You always book at the center, what you would call, let's say, I think the brand. Yeah, and that makes it easy. Yesterday on one of the sessions, David was there. DCC and MCP was explained for those who were not there. I did the project at KLM in 2015, and I think this was one of my most fun projects in respect to yield and rewardness I ever did, because it turned out to be the biggest partner-based auxiliary we got, and KLM had a very fair FX markup on the mid rate. We wanted to be lower than what the issuing bank did, but still it is a nice markup. But also from a customer perspective, and that's what's interesting as well, customers like to pay in their own currency. First of all, I can relate much more to euro than Tanzania shilling, because I don't know the value. If I see it expressed in my currency, I know what the value is. And also, people like certainty. They like a guarantee. So they know if they can pay in their own currency at the moment of checkout, they know exactly what they have to pay. Otherwise, they have to await the card statement of their card issuer to see what rates are used, and then that can even be a surprise. So it was a double whammy, both from the merchant, hotel or airline, as well as for the customer.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And we were also, one of the areas that's, challenging with the current hospitality setup of the website or app just being a reservation platform and not an e-commerce platform. There are all sorts of different ways of paying, which again increase conversions, which are more cost effective for the hotel brand. Yeah. So a company like Uplift, which offers buy now, pay later, or PayPal, or even Ideal in the Netherlands, you kind of need to be able to transact at a central point to be able to do those things, don't you?
I would tend to say yes. Otherwise, and I know this is a difficult term in the hospitality world. The merchant of record can be very fragmented. It can be the hotel owner, and that can be the case. But that means that everyone who is accepting the payment should be the merchant of record. So has to make an own contract, kind of, with the payment provider. So if you can do that centrally, that is of course much easier. Also, me being a customer, and I'm relatively new to the hospitality world, to be honest, I do not mind who I pay, whether it's the brand or whether it's the hotel, as long as the payments experience is smooth and works.
Yeah. Well, and I think some of the very important companies in the travel sector, Booking.com, for example, have made prolific announcements about becoming a fintech and moving into the payment space. You're Dutch, they're Dutch. Feel free to comment.
It's interesting because as a customer, I make use of Booking.com, and also prior to me coming here, it was interesting to see what they are changing in respect to payments. They are becoming, and you probably know, more and more in the money flow. So they're also collecting on behalf of the hotel chains the money. So when I made a booking for my upcoming holiday, I had three options in respect to payment. I could either pay directly, so they would take my money immediately from my card. they could charge it 1 week in advance prior to me coming to the hotel, or I would be able to pay the hotel still upon arrival. So I thought it was interesting to see how fragmented they are, and or at least what kind of choice they give to the customer. And from customer perspective, and we're talking about centric payments, I like that. Yeah. But the interesting part is that I was still missing out on alternative forms of payment. I have my card in the booking.com environment, but probably it seems that they still need a kind of a guarantee towards the hotel that they need, let's say, the card. What they could do, and I know there are companies out there who can do that, is that that the card is passed in the background as a guarantee and shared in a tokenized way with the hotel, but you can still on the front end ask for another payment option, and that's interesting.
But if you're a hotel
Yeah.
and you want to manage your data and you want to know your customers the way you did it at KLM, don't you need to have access to customer payment data?
Sure. And, if you're talking about OTA payments, I think a very interesting discussion, and I'm sure you would have that, is if a customer is booking on an OTA, whose customer is it? Is it the customer of the OTA or is it the customer of the hotel? And let's say, for the sake of argument, that one could say it's the hotel, it's the guest of the OTA. But then it depends on your negotiating power and whether an OTA is willing to share, let's say the data.
What generally I think we see is that it's an OTA customer until check-in.
And then it moves over.
And then the data is finally shared. Not necessarily the payment data in a prepaid environment, but that actually has challenges for selling of ancillary services and upselling room types and things like that. I mean, at KLM, I assume that once you had a plane ticket purchase, that wasn't the end of the sales process.
No, correct. I think it's fair to say that the share of direct bookings at an airline is higher than with hotels. I think it was around 40-50%, which was good. So all the data is within the airline itself, and even for OTAs, because it's also booked on the platform of, or there are a lot of links with the GDS as well towards the airline. You still have a lot of data. Obviously, not as much as with direct bookings, but still, yeah.
And what kind of things would you do with the data?
Now, yeah, if I let's say focus more on the payment side, which is my expertise. I always say, and you need data for that as well, if you think payment is important, and I would always say try to convert your payment department from a cost center into a profit center, and that's really possible. Of course, it should fit into the strategy of your company, your long-term strategy. If it's not part of the strategy, one could say, okay, have a sit with senior people and see if that would fit in. Make a solid business case and see how much money you could save, or how you can increase the conversion potentially, and hopefully both. But with the data, we also noticed that what the preference was for people how to pay. Now, if a customer is logging in with his account, make sure that payment is already pre-filled or is at the top. And the same applies to the currency. Make the payment experience smoother. Yeah? At the same time, if it's not a guest, and that's how I always liked it to commercialize financial processes. What you could think of if you have direct bookings, an order, the sequence of your payment options on your website doesn't have to be random. Yeah? Look what Google is doing. They're selling positions. Why should you not do that as a merchant with your payment options? Often the payment providers, they have big wallets. Go out to PayPal, go out to Visa, go out to MasterCard. You want to be on the first row? Well, pay for it. Yeah.
That's a great point. I think that as an industry, we've agreed that a centralized, guest-centric approach to payments makes sense. I think the years leading up to COVID, that was sort of a little bit difficult for people to really embrace fully. Over the course of COVID, everything being done, remote check-in, and the labor shortages around the world, I think that most hotel brands would love to immediately move to a place where all payments were done. I don't know what my phone's doing after I picked it up. Are all. It would be great to have payment. No one to have to process a payment at a property. Have the front desk be available to help the guests, but sort of like with an airline kiosk, the 1 in 10 people who have a challenge can speak to a person. Otherwise, just go to your room, use your key, and be done. In order to do that, the people in this room would need a lot of support from the C-level executives and their companies.
Yeah.
How did you experience that? What are some lessons learned from your exposure with KLM?
I think sometimes a bad thing can be a good thing, like that airlines have a very low margin. We always had to look at cost, and our C-level executive was the CFO, and he was very much liking the idea that we could save costs by changing our payment proposition. So what you have to do is find someone in senior management who is willing and able to support your idea. Of course, that starts with looking at the strategy of your company and see if your idea would fit into that. Or turn it around, make such a profound and solid business case that one cannot say no, that it's a no-brainer to do that. And then I think that's the biggest milestone, because then you have C-level support. And then the journey starts. You have to start talking to stakeholders. And suddenly whole processes, but we have done this for 50 years. Yeah, but now we're doing it differently. Yeah, that is tricky. But if the focus is there, and if you have the buy-in from senior management, and you have to speak to your revenue management, to your ticketing, to your accounting department, and you still want to be on the Christmas card list of your accounting department, explain them why you are doing it. And during the process, and once you've had it live, keep on sharing your successes, and also make sure that you involve your stakeholders. And it's a lengthy process, but first let's say the strategy should be clear.
And for those of you who aren't aware, there's a lovely white paper on the hedna.com site in the payments area on how to build the perfect business case. And some of the things that Maarten has mentioned, some of the cost savings, some of the revenue enhancements are included in that document, which is only a couple of years old and has, I think, aged well.
Yeah.
I think we're in for a period of profound change within the industry. I think the findings of the Amadeus research are really very powerful. Again, I encourage you all to look at that. As we wrap up our time, what's the one piece of advice you could give to this audience other than hire a consultant who has 30 years in airline industry experience?
That would have been my answer. Yeah, that was my 30 seconds sales pitch. Yeah. Now, all kidding aside, if you start such a journey, have a good plan and make sure you have the buy-in of senior management, and be prepared for a bumpy ride. Also, don't try to do everything yourself. You're a hotel company, we were an airline, and we clearly decided that we cannot do everything ourselves. To give an example, if we are selling in 70 countries and I want to offer 3 payment options per country, and I would make all the connections myself, I had to make 210 connections. It's not doable, not from an IT perspective, but also take into account what it will do for your accounting. So make sound decisions in respect to make or buy. We used PSPs for that, and that took a lot away of our worries. The same is applying to the offering of DCC of MCP. So always wonder if you can do it yourself, but as there is probably a labor shortage everywhere, then it's probably better to sometimes outsource things and stick to your core business and focus on what you want. And and obviously, if anyone is wanting to know more, I'm more than happy to sit down with you, whether it be a merchant or a payment company, to see where I could help you.
Well, thank you very much, Maarten. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for Hedna for scheduling this.
Or are there any questions?